cookie.
You can get a new box of cookies in as fast as an hour with Walmart Express Delivery.
Are you my guilty self-conscience?
No, I'm the voice offering you promo code EXPRESS for free delivery on your first order.
Hey, who ate my cookies?
You mean, these cookies?
Order now. Welcome to your Walmart. Promotion valid for first express delivery order. $50 minimum subject to availability. Restrictions apply.
Get ready for Netflix's gripping new medical drama, Pulse. Set in a cutting-edge Miami trauma center, third-year resident Dr. Danny Sims is unexpectedly thrust into a promotion when beloved chief resident Dr. Xander Phillips gets suspended. Then, with the emotional and physical stakes at their highest, a storm will push the hospital and its residents to their limits. Witness how life can change in a heartbeat when you're operating under pressure. Watch Pulse April 3rd, only on Netflix.
Have you heard of Olivia, the travel company for lesbians and LGBTQ+ women? You know what they say. Life is short and the world is wide. And when you're a lesbian or LGBTQ+ woman, you want to be able to go on vacation, have some fun, and be yourself. Olivia Travel creates full takeovers of their cruise, resort, riverboat, and adventure vacations, so you can relax and be completely yourself. Olivia also provides the entertainment, bringing comedians and musicians from within our community. Traveling by yourself? No problem. Olivia has a robust solos program so you can travel independently, together. Single, coupled, or in a group, you'll meet amazing LGBTQ+ women who come from all walks of life yet have so much in common. Join the thousands of Olivians who travel to bucket list destinations all over the world. It's life-changing to be in the majority on your own vacation. Discover Olivia for yourself at olivia.com today. Welcome back to Cruising. My name is Sarah Gabrielli, and this week's interview is a very special one to me. It is with Valery Hughes, who worked as a nurse and HIV clinician in NYC hospitals throughout the AIDS epidemic of the 80s and 90s. And more recently, she co-authored a book with her friend and colleague Ellen Matzer called Nurses on the Inside, which talks all about their experiences working through the AIDS epidemic. So we're going to talk about Ellen kind of a lot in this episode. Though she's not a member of the queer community herself, she also spent her career working in HIV/AIDS care alongside Valery. And she was actually hired to build out the first ever designated AIDS unit in 1985 at St. Clair's Hospital, and then to do the same thing at Lenox Hill in 1990. In both hospitals, she brought on Valery as an HIV clinician. And together, they trained their staff to properly care for people with HIV and were able to create these rare safe spaces where both HIV and gay stigmas could at least be minimized for patients. Today, Valery lives with her wife and partner of 42 years, Mary, who she met working at Roosevelt Hospital back in 1979. That's also the time and place where she met Ellen. They're both retired now, Valery after many years of working in HIV clinical trials and then pushing off retirement in 2020 to work a few more years on COVID clinical trials. But she finally retired officially in 2022 and this year invited me to her gorgeous West Village apartment. And we both sat down to discuss some stories from the book, some new ones, and really take a behind-the-scenes look at these designated AIDS units and the experiences of nurses at that time. I should warn you, the conversation gets a little medically graphic at times, so if you're squeamish, you may want to be ready to skip through those parts. Here is Valery Hughes. This story kind of starts with you and Ellen coming together and becoming friends and working together for the first time. How did you meet?
Well, I was working in the ICU at Roosevelt Hospital, and she came on as a staff nurse there as well. She has a very different temperament and personality to me. She's calmer, not as noisy. I'm very loud and noisy, actually.
Which you wouldn't know right now.
Well, I'm old now, but at the time I was very exuberant.
and you're described as like not taking shit from anyone.
Right.
And kind of
I was
tackling people that try to...
Very much feminist, very much not going to take any kind of bullshit from people. I think the first year she was there, her father got terribly ill. He got cancer. And he was in the hospital and needed a private duty nurse. And so she asked if I would special him when I wasn't working. So I did that. And I took care of him to the end. It forged a bond between us because prior to that, we hadn't been particularly close. But Ellen became a very close friend. So,
And she asked you to do that, like, because of your sort of
She asked
nonsense?
me to do that because she thought I had the skills for it.
Yeah.
And also probably that I could intervene for her father in a way that maybe somebody who was more timid would not.
Yeah.
And certainly I did that.
Yeah.
So I was not fearful of saying what I felt the patient needed and saying it again and again until I got it done, which sometimes was necessary.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Oh, yeah.
And that was that 79?
It had to have been 79, yeah.
That was also sort of the first time that it seems you crossed paths with HIV/AIDS.
Yes,
right?
but we had
You
no
had no
idea
idea
at the time. No idea.
Yeah. So can you describe what that experience was like looking back now? What was the first time you crossed paths with the disease?
Well, we had a woman in the ICU who had a very odd pneumonia called psittacosis, which you can get from birds, but she didn't have any birds. She had a really bad, weird x-ray, and she had to be intubated almost immediately and died within a week. And that's despite aggressive support with pressors and things to keep the blood pressure up and intubation, artificial ventilation, and heavy dose steroids, all of the things that you could do for somebody who had pneumonia. They tried everything and it didn't work. And then boom, she was gone. So that was probably in 79. And thinking back, I think it's possible that she had HIV and we just didn't know. Then you have to fast forward a couple of years because Ellen was in New York, but I was not. I was in Thailand from 80 to 81. And then when I came back, the ICU was sort of, every once in a while we would get somebody come in and crash and burn. Mm-hmm. They would come in and have trouble speaking. They would give a history of about a 4-week lead in to having much more trouble breathing as the days went by and not being able to eat. And if they were able to climb 4 flights of steps because they lived in a 4th floor walk-up, then they had to just stop at every level and try to catch their breath. But these were young men. These were men in their 20s. There was no way that whatever they had could ever give you this constellation of symptoms. And then they would come in and they would have oral thrush, which is something that it's a fungal infection. It's called Candida albicans. And you see a lot in little kids or in people who are immune suppressed from high-dose steroids, but you never see it in regular, healthy 20-year-old men. And then there would be weight loss. And sometimes there were peculiar purple lesions on their skin. And so as they kept coming in, we realized something else was going on, but it just stayed in my ICU. There was nobody. It's not like I was going to call somebody and say, oh, by the way, in your ICU, do you see people like this? There was no cell phones. There was no
internet, obviously.
No internet, no social media, and there was nothing. And then all of a sudden, we started looking at this publication that came out once a week called Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. And they started compiling data on these people who were dying from a weird pneumonia, pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, which is called something else now, but we still call it PCP. And that was a very big deal. And all of a sudden people said, this is an infectious disease.
And PCP is
a type of pneumonia, the classic AIDS pnumonia that people talk about.
So you were in Thailand in
80 and 80, the first part of 81.
What were you doing there?
I worked in the emergency room in a refugee camp called Kawi Dong.
Is it kind of safe to say, like, between 79 and then when you're talking about getting back in 81, that these cases of mostly young men with pneumonia are kind of more and more?
Yes.
It honestly surprises me that even without internet and cell phones and all of our regular means of communication now, that it ended up being so isolated for a couple of years. You would think that hospitals would have protocol like that to kind of
I don't think they did then.
No, they obviously didn't.
Yeah.
But it really surprises me. And also, like, why would something be a trend isolated to one hospital,
I don't know. And I think that what ended up happening was people did start to talk about it.
Yeah.
So we formed nurses and aides care. There were all sorts of physician groups that were formed around addressing this, but it was slow. Things were not published in the media. I mean, people got their information from the newspaper. It wasn't even on TV. But if you read professional journals, you would see it, like the MMWR. Medical journals would start publishing as a letter. That's one of the ways physicians communicated with each other, is to write a letter to the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine or some other professional journal. And that's how they discovered, oh, this is not just happening on the west side of Manhattan. And people started getting together and comparing notes.
When did you start to realize that it was mainly gay men specifically?
Well, at the time, we got many more young men and sometimes middle-aged men, but sometimes we would have female sex workers as well who might acquire HIV that way. And so that was sort of just confused us. We didn't know what the hell we were dealing with.
At what point did people start talking about it as this like gay male cancer
That probably
disease?
was 82, 83. Yeah. And they called it gay-related immune deficiency.
What are some of the ways that people faced stigma because of this? I mean, the examples are kind of endless in the book.
A lot of times people would be telling their family that they were gay at the same time they were telling them they had HIV and that they were dying.
Yeah.
So many families responded in a beautiful way, but many, many did not. They said, "You're gay? That can't be. It's horrible, and I disown you." And so they had no family to visit and no family to advocate for them, more to the point. And that's really important in medicine. It's important today. It was really important then. And a lot of people had nobody to advocate for them. Like, why aren't you taking the food in so they can eat something? And why aren't you emptying the garbage so it doesn't smell like a charnel house in there, for God's sake?
Yeah. So a lot of the stigma was like, or I mean, it's everywhere, but it's also amongst the medical workers.
Oh, yes,
too.
absolutely.
And so you're alluding to that they would leave the trays of food out.
They thought they would get it because they didn't really know what was causing it or how it was spread. They felt put upon and they were put upon. And so they sometimes were not easy colleagues. We were doing sort of a round table for emergency staff about how to protect themselves and yet how to handle people with decency. And one of the surgeons there said, "That's all very well and good, but I'm not taking that person to the OR if they have a gunshot or something like that." He said, "It's so dangerous." And I said, "Well, you know what they say, if you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen." You know, you went into medicine and surgery to take care of people. And he had a cow over this. He went to the administration, tried to get me fired. But in fairness, knowing what I know about surgery, it's true. It was a huge risk.
Yeah.
Surgeons do get stabbed with needles all the time. So it is a concern. So in many ways, I think I was being unfair, but people need to learn how to get around that. I figured it out. I had splashes and got bitten and got stuck, and I was lucky, and maybe some surgeons weren't. Even in those years, I was pretty confident that it wasn't airborne, because if it had been airborne, we'd all have been dead by then.
Right. That's what I found so interesting, because it's like by the time you realize how serious it is, you'd already been working with people.
Yes. And
would
please
have caught
remember, in those days, no universal precautions. We bathed people, drew blood without gloves.
Well, that I want to talk about extensively, because
Yeah.
you said that you were literally taught it was rude at certain times to put gloves on.
When I was in school, if we had put gloves on to give a bed bath, we would have failed. We would have failed. Never put a gloved hand on somebody's skin. How horrible is that? How would you like to be treated like that? And so it was very much instilled in me never to do that. It took me a long time to get used to universal precautions.
Yeah.
And I had to have a few scares before I embraced them thoroughly.
Really?
Yes.
So you obviously still, like, that entire time were being insanely careful. I mean, you both talk in the book about being very sure that you're being careful. I'm not worried about myself.
Well, I don't know where we had that confidence, but
that is kind of what my question too. It's like, I admire it so much. And also I love the very obvious conclusion that if it was airborne, you would have gotten it already. But everyone physically dealing with patients, like, and not using gloves, there is a risk. There's obviously a risk.
Well, maybe.
You were just worried about spilling water on this table.
No, because I didn't want to fry your equipment.
That would be much better than contracting HIV.
I know. Try to put it into perspective. I mean, I had already, by the time HIV came around, I'm just going to be real, cleaned up shit so many times you can't imagine. We used to have this thing on the first unit I worked on, which has been torn down now. It was called Russell 2. We had a bedpan hopper. And so you have to put it in there. And what it does is that it rinses all the poop out and then steams it. But one day I put it in and I slammed it closed and I pulled the lever. Exploded right in my face. That was a very bad day for me.
Yeah.
I had my exposures to things.
But at what point or was there ever a point where it seemed the rest of the world understood how it was transmitted and how?
1985.
Really? And so then from then on, is there did the stigma change? I mean, it seems
no, because the stigma was attached to being homosexual.
Yeah.
It was not attached to the fact that it was an infectious disease.
Right.
It attached to the fact that people so revile gays.
I imagine you realize pretty early on that when people are coming in with these certain symptoms, there ends up being nothing that you can actually do to save them.
Nothing to do to fix them, no.
Yeah.
We came to that conclusion very early on. And so these patients were not kept in the main room anymore. And they were put in the back in isolation rooms and basically left to die. Those nurses who took on the challenge did what they could to make them as comfortable as possible. And it wasn't until we left and started working in dedicated units that we really developed the art of trying to make people as comfortable as they could be. That doesn't mean that they were comfortable. It just means that they weren't alone and that they weren't trying to do it themselves and they knew they had a partner in this transition. That's really an important thing for somebody who's dying, is to know that there's somebody there who's going to help them through.
I had a quote that it's so obviously the point of this book, but I just had never thought about it before. One of you writes, you and your co-author, Ellen, one of you says, medicine didn't know what to do, so it was all the nurses who carried the burden of comfort and care, which, of course, we all know that there was so long where no one knew how to handle HIV, AIDS, but I had just never thought about in the medical industry, it's just about care. It's about easing these people through this horrible experience. That is the medical work that could have been done at that time for so long, which I think is so interesting.
You bring up a good thought about why nurses are so important, and that's because when things like this happen, you just have to go step by step. And even if you don't have the antibiotic, the antiviral, whatever the magic bullet is going to be, people still need care. And so you address their symptoms, you address their comfort level, you address their complete and total terror. And that's what nurses do.
And sometimes it sounds like you kind of had to meet them where they're at as far as their mortality.
That's exactly right. You have to meet people where they're at. People are ready to go in their own time is all I could say. That I remember a guy, he was a young guy, probably maybe 27 or 28 when I first met him this was at Lenox Hill.
So this in Lenox Hill, this is 8 East?
This is 8 East, exactly.
Okay. Can you explain what 8 East is actually?
So I worked in two hospitals that had designated AIDS units. The first one was St. Clair's, and St. Clair's had multiple floors that were designated AIDS centers. And then Ellen moved to Lenox Hill.
That first place was the first designated AIDS unit that Ellen was hired to build out.
Okay. That's right. And then when she went to Lenox Hill, she was hired to build out 8 East as well. You
were starting to tell a story about someone at Lenox Hill that I interrupted you to explain.
So he came in, I guess because he had fainted at work, some pretty obvious sign that he was sick. But as soon as I saw him, I said, oh my God, is he sick? He was wearing 4 shirts, 3 sweaters. His temperature was 104. And when you have a fever of 104, you feel cold and it's horrible. So there's no way to bring it down. And if you don't actually get people's fever down, they can go higher and higher. And then when I got him undressed, I took off all of the myriad shirts he had on. He had KS everywhere.
Which is what?
Kaposi sarcoma is a form of malignancy that happens to people with immune suppression, and it manifests as these violaceous light purple to dark purple lesions.
The bruises you were talking about before, that was KS.
Yes. I said, so how long have you been feeling like this? And how long have you had these splotches on your skin? And he said, oh, about 6 months. I said, so have you missed some work? And he said, no. So he never didn't go to work. He went to work every day. He had a temp of 104 for probably days and days and days and days. He had these lesions. He was losing weight. He couldn't eat. He had diarrhea 15 times a day. And he went to work every day. So this is a guy who wasn't ready to face his mortality.
Yeah.
Because that was the original question you asked.
Yeah.
People's level of acceptance with their own mortality. He was not ready. This one couple, there was a man and a woman. They both had very, very bad advanced disease. They both had very bad KS. And in fact, she had such bad KS that she could not go out in public without her face covered because she had not only dark lesions, but raised lesions. And so it was very deforming. And so they decided they were going to go to Mexico to get something called blood boiling. They would take the blood out and then expose it to high temperatures, and then put it back in while it was still pretty hot. And they said that that would cure them from HIV. And really all it did was terminally raise their temperature, and it killed both of them. But it was horrible. Yes, it was horrible.
And so it sounds like 80s is definitely where you wanted to be taken care of if you were.
Definitely.
And that's because the staff there is like specifically trained.
Yes. So Ellen handpicked everybody.
And it sounds like a lot of doctors and nurses didn't want to deal with AIDS.
Well, by the time we got to Lenox Hill, that was a lot less.
Okay.
A lot less. But when we were at Roosevelt Hospital, it was bad. It was really bad. You couldn't get people to go in the room. You know, when those doctors made rounds, they would make all these crappy anti-gay jokes. And I was very closeted in those days.
Yeah.
So it's hurtful.
You were saying earlier, people often didn't have families to advocate for them, or sometimes they didn't because they were disowned for being gay.
Yeah.
And then in a lot of scenarios, you all as nurses kind of stepped in.
Yes,
to
definitely.
be doing what the family would have been doing in like a lot of ways, like even after people died. And
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine the nurse having to call a funeral home to try to get somebody buried? That was something we did at St. Clair's all the time because people got completely abandoned. They would just bring them to the emergency room, dump them, and that was that. So when they died, we had to try to find a place to get them buried from with no money. You could imagine how undertakers would feel. The use of those big needles, always in contact with large amounts of infected blood. They were crazed, and they did not want to take or embalm people who had HIV. They didn't want to touch them.
Yeah.
You could sort of understand it. They probably had some sloppy practices too and exposed themselves to blood and body fluids. So instead of learning how not to expose themselves, they just said, no, we're not having that. The one place in New York that did was Redden's on 14th Street, which is still in business. So I have to call out to them because when we were at the end of our ropes trying to get a funeral home to bury somebody, Redden's would take them when nobody else would.
What other ways did you find yourself advocating for patients? I know the list is kind of endless, but I feel like I read a bit about some rule breaking and kind of like things that wouldn't fly anymore.
Oh my God. I'm amazed we didn't get caught for some of this. We once had a patient with MDR TB, the worst kind of TB.
Tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis. So let me get started on why there was a multi-drug resistant TB epidemic in New York in 1992. That's a very bad place for me to talk because then I get totally enraged.
I mean, it's interesting though.
Yes.
Funding was cut, right?
Okay. So what happened in the 80s was that a lot of funding got caught for both mental health and tuberculosis care. The city at the time had a very robust TB program because that's where you're going to get TB is in the city. So what that meant is that they had people who would make sure that patients would take their meds. They had a definite 2-week in hospital stay. And then after that, they would have every other day, or sometimes they had a daily visit from a healthcare worker who would go in and make sure they were taking their anti-TB meds. So what would happen once the funding got stopped is that poor people in particular would get TB. They would go to the hospital. They would get treated for 2 weeks, and they would get sent out with a prescription, not even with a handful of pills, but a prescription to pick up pills. They had no insurance. They had no resources. They had nowhere to go. and they would go back out on the street and just never take their pills again. So they've had partially treated tuberculosis and it comes back. Then they go back in the hospital, get treated again. Maybe that would happen 2 or 3 times. And by the 3rd time, that person has an untreatable form of TB because the germ has been exposed to it in a less than therapeutic level. And so what you do is you train it to replicate a mutation that is not susceptible to the drug at all. That's a very important thing to remember about TB and about HIV, because that's how we failed so often with HIV meds. So
you had a patient.
We all just loved him. He was such a sweet person. And he was isolated for months and months and months. And one day he really wanted to go outside. And so what we did was we snuck him out and took him to the roof so that he could be outside. And we were masked and he was masked and we didn't get into an elevator with anybody else. But it was an extraordinarily dangerous thing to do. But it gave him hope that he might survive and that his whole life wouldn't be stuck in that hospital room. He never got to go out or see anybody. He couldn't have visitors. It was just terrible. So all he saw were the nurses. And boy, if we'd gotten caught, there would have been hell to pay. Often what would happen is that people did not want anybody to know they had HIV. Right. And so we were very quiet about who our patients were. We never said their names or told anybody. And if people called, we would say who, what. There's one person in particular he was my hairdresser. For Ellen's birthday, I took her to get her hair done by him, and they became great friends. And then one day he called her and he was sick. He was very sick. And so he said, I can't let anybody know I have HIV. I'm in an industry where I have to touch people all the time. I can't be known. You have to buff me up and get me out of here. And the way she did it is that she would go to his house and give him his infusions in the house. She didn't have him be hospitalized.
What was it like for trans people seeking treatment at this time?
Oh my God. Even more reviled than gay people, trans people. Yes. Well, we were lucky because one of the people who worked with us, a nurse named Yvonne Ritter, was a trans person. She died this year, actually. So she was very, very involved. She worked on 8 East as a staff nurse and then later went into psych once 8 East closed. She must have saved a lot of people in psych. She was just a terrific person. So when Ellen wanted to hire her, all the sort of ladies at lunch who ran all of the business at Lenox Hill was a community hospital for the Upper East Side. And they were saying, a trans person? A what? You can't hire him, her, whatever.
Yeah.
And Ellen said, yes, I can. And I'm doing it. And she insisted. And so that sort of broke the ice, if you will. So things weren't as hard, certainly at Lenox Hill. But I know that it's really been a difficult road for anybody who was trans and had HIV. It's very difficult to find hormone replacement. But Callum Lord had a great physician who was very facile with prescribing hormone replacement. So I always sent them there. And so they got taken care of. But that's a really hard thing to find. It was very hard to find in the 90s.
Right. It just says a lot about Ellen's thoughtfulness throughout all these departments that she's shaped. I feel like she also wrote about making sure that people were comfortable with gay people and with gay people showing affection towards before hiring them, that kind of thing. Which is, of course, would make all the difference in caring for people with HIV.
Yeah, I think she was able to weed out people who were phobic about gays because that would have been kind of uncomfortable for everybody concerned.
Well, I think that this was an Ellen section, but I'm sure you can speak to this. It was then the 1990s, and she said something about, at this point, it was almost fashionable to be working in an AIDS center.
Oh, yeah. That's how she sort of got rid of, oh, gosh. This is a terrible thing. There was an epithet that was conferred upon women who wanted to hang out with gay men but weren't really interested in them, and they were called fag hags.
Oh, yeah. We know all about fag hags still.
A lot of fag hags, if you will, rose to the challenge and took care of people with HIV. So
I love that.
Yeah. So anyway, if they came and they really just wanted to be all dressed up and hang with the boys, they were disabused very quickly. It wasn't about hanging with the beautiful boys. Yeah. It was hanging with that guy with the testicles like bowling balls. And that's what it meant.
It does make sense to me that at a certain point, it's I don't know, just being a young person in Brooklyn right now, that, that is the activism that people are doing is also at that point in time is surrounding HIV. And so once the sort of risks are mitigated, that would be the thing to do. I know that Ellen talked about this was happening a lot when she was pregnant, having to kind of field judgment over working where you were working. Is that something that you were feeling from the outside world like the whole time?
Well, I didn't get it too much.
Okay.
But of course, when Ellen was pregnant, first with Josh, I mean, people went crazy when she was pregnant with Josh. You're pregnant. You're going to give it to the baby. But people didn't understand how you transmit it, how it's transmitted.
Yeah.
So somehow they thought it would magically get into the baby. They were just worried for her. Other kinds of stigma were much worse. Anti-HIV stigma involved losing your housing. If your landlord found out you had HIV, out you go. Your job, if your employer found out you had HIV, you were out the door. Your insurance company could drop you because you had HIV. This happened to people with asthma, people with cancer, but with people with HIV, it happened all the time.
Yeah. The prison program that you...
Oh, what happened was this is St. Clair's again, they became a designated AIDS center. And as such, they drew the eye of Mother Teresa. And Mother Teresa said, I think St. Clair's ought to take care of these prisoners who are dying of AIDS, and they should go to St. Clair's and die there and not in a prison.
100%, because what were they doing before that?
They were in very rough shape when they got to us, so nobody was doing anything for them.
I can't even imagine. And also all the rest of the prison populations that didn't have this program. I mean, it's really dark to think about.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
And prisons there's all sorts of dark things. I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
But sometimes people with KS develop these god-awful swellings. One patient at Lenox Hill, his legs were about as swollen as this tabletop, and his testicles were about the size of bowling balls, and stretched and weeping and all sorts of stuff coming out of both his legs, and just trying to keep him clean was basically a full-time job. And that's what one of these guys came from prison with that. And Ellen did her best. She did her best to make him as comfortable as possible. And there are things that you can do, with powders and sheet changes and bathing and morphine to lessen the pain. And, she did all of that. And before that, all he would do, I'm sure, was lie on his bunk in Rikers or wherever it was he was imprisoned and shriek all day long, because he shrieked plenty even once he got to the hospital.
I cannot imagine.
Can't get up, have to poo in the bed, have to urinate in the bed. Nobody was going to go feed him either, so he was starving to death also.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But it's like, what happened to everyone else?
What did
prisons?
happen? They died quickly.
And horribly.
Quickly but horribly, yes.
Yeah.
And some of the deaths were horrible. I don't know if you've ever been short of breath. I myself really didn't have such a great idea about what that would feel like until I was much older.
Yeah.
I never felt so entrapped. And people who are dying of pneumonia, that's how they feel all the time.
Yeah,
that's how they feel. So these guys who had pneumonia, no oxygen, no comfort, no nothing, they were... It was just horrible, horrible until you lose consciousness, and it doesn't happen fast enough,
Yeah.
Have you heard of Olivia, the travel company for lesbians and LGBTQ plus women? You know what they say. Life is short and the world is wide. And when you're a lesbian or LGBTQ plus woman, you want to be able to go on vacation, have some fun, and be yourself. Olivia Travel creates full takeovers of their cruise, resort, riverboat, and adventure vacations, so you can relax and be completely yourself. Olivia also provides the entertainment, bringing comedians and musicians from within our community. Traveling by yourself? No problem. Olivia has a robust solos program so you can travel independently, together. Single, coupled, or in a group, you'll meet amazing LGBTQ plus women who come from all walks of life yet have so much in common. Join the thousands of Olivians who travel to bucket list destinations all over the world. It's life-changing to be in the majority on your own vacation. Discover Olivia for yourself at olivia.com today.
There are many ways to entice a potential new customer with flashy branding and calculated marketing strategies. But at the end of the day, the success of a business comes down to the ability to close the sale. And for businesses like Thrive Cosmetics, Allbirds, or Skims, it's what goes on behind the scenes, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple that makes the difference. For them and for millions of businesses, that difference is made with Shopify. Businesses that want to grow, grow with Shopify. Because if your goal is growth, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And Shopify will make sure you're ready. On the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. And with Shop Pay, they boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. It's no wonder Shopify is home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/realm. I love a multi-use beauty product, like an eye/cheek/lipstick. It makes a full face so much easier, plus you only need to bring one product along for touch-ups. And whether you're all about simple mascara and gloss, or you love to play with bold shapes and colors, you gotta have that trusty favorite you turn to for every look. Thrive Cosmetics makes certified 100% vegan and cruelty-free products you can depend on for everything from simple daily wear to show-stopping self-expression. And it's all made with clean, skin-loving ingredients, high-performance and trademarked formulas, and uncompromising standards. And Thrive Cosmetics is beauty that gives back. For every product purchased, they make a donation towards 8 major causes, including social justice organizations and those impacted by cancer and homelessness. It feels good knowing that when I purchase a product, I'm also able to give back to causes that matter to me. And one product I love from Thrive Cosmetics is the Brilliant Eye Brightener. Like I said, I love a product that can have multiple uses, and the Brilliant Eye Brightener is just that. It's an eyeshadow and highlighter stick that's super blendable, and I'm slowly but surely stocking up on the 31 shades that it comes in. Try your new trusty favorites with an exclusive set for our listeners. New customers can get the Liquid Lash Extensions Mascara and a mini-sized Brilliant Eye Brightener at a special set price with free shipping available at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. Or save more with 20% off your first order at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/thrive for 20% off your first order.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
So when did you meet Mary?
Early 1979, I was working in the ICU and I took a blood gas down. She worked in labs, and at the time she was running the blood gas lab, and I was working in what they called the open heart recovery room. So I went down there, and that's how I met her, and we became friendly. And
you don't remember anything more specific?
She says that she fell in love with me right away.
Really?
Yes.
Because you said something like
No, I didn't.
snarky.
I probably didn't say anything. I said, I need this stat.
Yeah.
That's probably all I said. And I stood there tapping my foot, waiting for the result. But I could tell you that after a while, I was the only person they ever sent down with a blood cast because I could get it turned around in no time at all.
Yeah.
And
Why send someone else? It's going to take longer.
Wonder why that was. Whenever we worked together, we would go to dinner. And she was the nicest person. Oh, my God, so nice. My father got sick. She would take him to a clinic if I was working, or if he was hospitalized, she'd bring him a milkshake. Oh, my God. My father was in love with Mary even before I was.
Oh, my God.
And how he loved her.
Do you remember what you were thinking about? Were you always...
just what a terrific person she is.
So were you, for all of this time, you kind of weren't thinking of romance?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
I wasn't.
And she obviously was.
I came back from Thailand and we became dinner friends again and we would see each other at parties. And one day, I guess we got really drunk and she wanted to spend the night. And so I said, sure. And she spent the night and that was that.
You mean, wait, so it was like the two of you hanging out and you got really drunk, or you were at a party?
No, we were at a party.
You were at a party and then she wanted to come back to your place.
Well, it was in the building where I lived.
And then from then on, it was romantic between you.
Yes. That was the day she asked for a commitment. And I don't know why. I guess I was drunk and I said yes.
It never crossed your mind before that?
Well, I didn't know how I could be a gay woman. I didn't know how to be gay.
Yeah.
Socially, I didn't know how to be gay. And I mean, I'd had sex with some women, but the mechanics were clumsy for me and I didn't understand it. And I had to grow into it. Even with Mary, I had to grow into it.
When you were with those other women, that was like pre-marriage even?
No.
Oh, then it was post.
This was after I broke up
okay.
with Joe and was living alone in this apartment building where a lot of the parties with nurses.
He was like at these parties that you were meeting people?
No, they were nurses I knew.
Oh my gosh, so interesting. In the late 70s kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, so she literally said, will you commit to me or something like that?
Yeah.
And then you said yes.
We were drunk, remember?
Yeah.
But I held to that. I did.
For a good long 42 years.
I know.
And so you're still working together?
Oh,
at that
gosh,
point?
no. You mean at that time? Because I was saying we're both retired.
No.
At
that in this current wherever we are at this point in time.
So
that was what year was that? 82?
82. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we worked together for another few years.
But you two were like sneaking around for a while.
Oh gosh, should I actually tell these stories? Sometimes we would meet in the lab and there was a rest area in the lab where the lab techs could take a nap or something like that. So we met there. There were on-call rooms that we had access to, so we would sneak around there, if you will. Mary was always very careful to be circumspect. And the reason for that is there's still a lot of anti-gay sentiment.
And you were hearing it everywhere at that time.
I was hearing it everywhere and it's really bad and it could be dangerous. And then when she moved in, it was Ellen I had the most hard time with. She and Ed decided to get married, and she wanted me to be her maid of honor. But then I thought, if she finds out I'm gay, she's going to worry that I'm going to start with her, because a lot of times women who find out you're gay think you're going to put the moves on them.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to make her uncomfortable in any way, because we'd be going to, sleeping in the same room the night before and all of that. And I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. So I never told her. And she kept saying, how is there room for both of you in that little apartment? And I said, oh, we make it work. We make it work. So we did try to keep it on the down low. The sort of interesting part was when I went shopping with my mother, we were in Macy's. I think we were buying underwear. And Mary has this thing that she does when she shops. She has to look at everything. So there I was. I picked up my stuff. Mommy picked up her stuff. And Mary's still wandering around back there. And I said, I don't know why I ever take her shopping. And she says, because she's your wife, that's why. And had never mentioned it before.
Yeah.
And would never, this was in the 80s, before marriage, before anything. And my mother knew what was going on immediately.
Oh, wow.
Both my parents loved her.
Wow, she just knew.
Yeah.
And she didn't have, sounded like she wasn't saying it with stigma in her voice.
My parents had very interesting thoughts about it.
What do you mean?
My father once was telling his friend, because I guess one of his friends noticed that Mary and I were very close. He said, they're two wounded doe. They're just comforting each other. And,
okay.
Oh, God, that's so daddy. But I think my mother possibly was sort of latent herself. She always tells these two stories about meeting gay women in bars. And once she set her hair on fire or something. She was so nervous. But I think she was also interested.
If that makes you really nervous and clumsy, it sounds like you're into it a little bit. It sounds like you see yourself in them a little.
Yeah, I think it's possible.
When did you come out to Ellen?
Oh, after she got married.
You were just waiting for that, and then I'm assuming she reacted well and fine.
Yeah, she was fine.
She had a long history of accepting gay people at that point.
It's funny because in the beginning, she was really very naive about homosexuality. And she would say, with the first people that she saw who had HIV, she would say, oh, he's got such a nice friend. He's so supportive. And I'm like, really?
You knew right away, of course.
And I really didn't feel like I wanted to tell her. I felt like she should come to this on her own. I wasn't sure what it had to, I didn't think it had anything to do with anything.
Right.
Because as I said, we didn't know anything. And we had seen women too who had HIV. You know, we didn't know what HIV was until 85.
Did you ever go to the lesbian bars around here or gay bars?
Oh gosh, we did.
You did?
My God,
when were you like you and Mary going, or like?
Well, that was a large part of our social life.
Okay.
So
oh my gosh, tell me everything about it.
It was the Cubby Hole before it was Henrietta Hudson.
Okay, right. The original Cubby Hole. Would you say the Cubby Hole was like the main spot for you?
That was the main spot.
Okay.
But we did other things. They used to have these dance nights at certain places that were really mostly for guys, and they would have a woman's night. And
Right. Can you tell me everything you remember about the Cubby Hole, basically?
I sort of have left out all my other friends who were working with us at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Lucy Gratch, who was an X-ray tech.
There were other queer women that you were working with.
Oh, yeah.
And
definitely.
you would go with them.
Yes. In the beginning, certainly it was Lucy, Lucia, Mary, and me. I mean, I have a couple of very vivid memories from the Cubby Hole.
Tell me.
Well, one was that when my father died, I had a very contentious relationship with him, but I still loved him, and I was very upset when he died.
Yeah.
And so they were trying to cheer me up. And so they decided that the way to cheer me up is to expose their breasts to me sequentially. You would go around the wall, and then there was the hall for the bathroom. There was an entrance on this side and an entrance on that side. So they put me on this side, and then they would go into the hall, flash me, and then got to the bar.
Such a official operation.
It was very
routine.
official. Yes, it was very funny and so sweet that they did that to cheer me up.
Oh, that's really nice.
It was very nice. I can remember once I had a friend, a gay guy, and I asked him to meet me there just because he was coming to town from Atlanta, and I'd known him for a long time. We worked at St. Clair's together. And so he came in, and Lulu immediately said, "What is a man doing here?"
Mm-hmm.
And gay as a goose, clearly. I don't know what on earth was her problem. She had a lot of men friends who were gay, but
was it the kind of place
where
where
men... It could be
men...
a little hostile
yeah,
for men, yeah.
But would you see them? Did you not?
Very rarely.
Okay.
Very rarely.
At that time, were there other places in public where you and Mary were sort of publicly presenting as partners, or were you doing the roommate thing in other spaces?
No public displays of affection. That's sort of Mary's way anyway.
Okay.
So that's not permitted. If people figured it out, they figured it out.
Yeah. Something that we haven't really touched upon is the way that the government directly impacted the timeline of all of this, and sort of how much funding was going to AIDS research, how public it was as an issue. Are you able to talk a little bit about that?
Well, of course, since I was there, I remember how long it took Ronald Reagan to say AIDS.
So Reagan took office in 1981, right? But he didn't publicly mention AIDS until his second term in 1985. At that point, over 12,000 people had already reportedly died of AIDS. An infectious disease had been killing thousands of people, and the president had ignored it for an entire term. And this is because of homophobia, plain and simple. Throughout his first term, when reporters would bring up HIV/AIDS at press briefings, Reagan's press secretary at the time, Larry Speakes, would openly mock the questions, often joking about the reporters being gay. I'm not going to get it. Are you going to get it? Then in 1987, Reagan vetoed a bill that would have provided $30 million in AIDS education funding. I'm pretty sure Congress passed it anyway. But The reason he vetoed it is because he claimed it promoted immoral behavior. AIDS education promoted immoral behavior. By the time this man left office in 1989, there were over 82,000 reported cases of AIDS in the U.S., totaling more than 46,000 deaths.
Then Dr. Fauci stepped in, and when he stepped in, he's a very big noise. And he made sure that the NIH got funding in those early years when the AIDS clinical trials group got formed as part of from government funding, made sure that studies got off the ground, got scientists together, created units where people would know how to do the research process. All of that was instrumental in coming up with combination therapy, which it didn't happen really effectively until 1997. In fact, November of 1997.
I was literally alive. That's so crazy.
Yeah. So in 1997, in November of 1997, they came out with a reverse transcriptase inhibitor called 3TC, and at the same time with the first protease inhibitor called sequinavir. And all of a sudden, people said, well, maybe we ought to mix these things up. And so they were doing AZT, 3TC, and sequinavir. And for the first time, people were starting to improve clinically. And also at the same time, there were diagnostic tests that were essential because up until 1997, we were looking in the rearview mirror. By looking at the CD4 count, you're like, where have I been? Because that tells you what already happened. Now we could measure viral loads or viremia in the body because the test got developed. And so we had 3TC sequinavir and a test that would tell us where we were going. And we could look back at old blood. So there was a guy in Pittsburgh who had saved a lot of blood from studies that he'd been doing. And he did something called Operation Look Back, and he analyzed all those sets of blood and did viral loads on them. And that's where he came up with the hypothesis that if you presented to the hospital with a viral load that was over X amount, that you would be seriously ill or dead within a year. And that if your viral load was lower, that it might take you longer to progress. So that was very important knowledge to have at the time.
Yeah. When did HIV testing first become available?
They first developed the test in 1985.
What were the risks associated with it?
The big risk is if you find out you've got HIV, first of all, I'm not sure you understand what it's like to find out you've got a lethal disease.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is going to do a number on you.
Yeah.
But the other thing was, as soon as people found out you had HIV, no more insurance, no more housing, no more family, no more lover, no more any support at all. That happens so often, I can't begin to tell you. So finding out you had HIV, plus there was nothing to do about it. So if people came up to me and said, well, I really want to get tested. And I said, well, do you have symptoms? And they'd say no. And I'd say, why don't you wait and find out? What are you going to do about it if you have that information?
Right.
It's just going to with your head.
Right.
And I also would refuse to get tested. I felt like I'd been exposed many times and that I probably should get tested. And I did ultimately, I guess, in late 1985 get tested because I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to transmit it.
Were you living your life as if you maybe had it then?
Not really.
So
Not
that's kind
really.
of backwards.
It is.
But that's kind of the thing with all these people that maybe we're not getting tested because of the risks, is that if they're not living their life as if they potentially do have it, then they're spreading it.
Well, that is the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess we really didn't know even back then what was safe and what was unsafe.
There was mention in the book of poppers being a focus of potentially.
Oh, I know.
I find that so interesting. I never heard of it.
So poppers are amyl nitrate, and amyl nitrate is a potent vasodilator. And so they thought, well, if the guy does poppers and he's the bottom, that he might have more vasodilation in his rectum and therefore might possibly be a risk factor for HIV. So they thought that poppers might have something to do with it.
Was that a big thing? Were people ceasing to do poppers as much?
Oh, yeah. I think people
really
did stop doing it, but then they started again.
And again, they're back at it. I've never heard anything about this.
Yeah.
But it said in the book, that it was inconclusive, that you still, Who knows? Maybe you just had to say that.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't done any science research on it.
You should.
There are people who that is one thing that they're focused
they look into
on.
it.
So they're looking into it.
Yeah. Where are we at right now in the U.S. as far as rates of HIV infection and what PrEP has done for everyone, what PrEP really means?
I can't really tell you the numbers. I should have looked that up ahead of time because they change year to year.
Yeah.
But I would say the trajectory is down, down, down. In New York City, there was a huge push to not only roll out PrEP, but to make getting treated for other STIs extremely accessible in the Department of Health clinics because they wanted to end AIDS by, was it 2030? I don't even remember, but so they had some date in mind. So PrEP has really been a godsend in many ways. That means pre-exposure prophylaxis. So that means taking medicines, either getting a long-acting injection that you get every other month or taking a pill every day. And if you get exposed to HIV, because it's already got high blood levels, the virus doesn't get a chance to attach and work. And so it's very difficult to get infected under those circumstances. Not impossible, very difficult. The other really important part of PrEP is that treatment is prevention. So if a person is treated and they have an undetectable viral load, they cannot spread HIV to somebody else. There is no virus in their semen, and a lot of work has been done to elucidate this. So if you're antibody positive and you're undetectable, it means that you have the virus in you, but you are not able to spread it around. And that's an important concept, right? Even more importantly, if you look at how treatment worked in sub-Saharan Africa, you have a population-based model that proves that treatment functions as prevention because the numbers of HIV infection in sub-Saharan Africa went down when people started to get effective treatment. And so it's worked very well. The flip side of it is that it's done the thing that all gay men wanted all the time, which was to get rid of the latex. And so the rates of syphilis and gonorrhea have gone up rather a lot.
Oh, yeah. They're around here, they're not using condoms. There's no way.
Oh, no. Well,
It's
not that they ever were.
You're
but
literally a loser if you were.
Yeah.
I'm like, you guys are crazy, but anyway.
You could still treat syphilis pretty handily, but gonorrhea has become harder and harder to treat. So it's just one of those things that it's a mixed blessing. You know, you can't fight your nature. People just have to stop being cute about their sex drive. You want to have sex, you're going to have sex. The drive behind it, the urge, the hormone that allows you to have that urge, you were given that. You didn't come up with that yourself. It's not because you're a bad person that you want to have an orgasm. Everybody wants to have an orgasm.
Yeah.
And why are we being so freaking cute about it? I don't understand it. Everybody has sex all the time. You just don't know about it because of the nature of the way our country developed to be. We came out of Puritanism, and so sex was inherently wrong. Sex is not inherently wrong. It is a biological fact of life. And the fact that we've ignored that biological fact of life is how we got into the HIV car to begin with.
I feel like I know some of the answer to this, but what do you feel like drew you to working in this field for, so rigorously, so long?
I just thought it was so unfair. How could this be? And here I am right at the beginning. Maybe I can do something. I thought I could help. I very much wanted to be part of the solution. And then as I worked in it and got more enmeshed in it, I became not only emotionally invested in it, but intellectually invested in it. This was is a terrific intellectual challenge. And I'm not the only one who finds it interesting. Also, the work itself is so rewarding. Sometimes you can save people. It's a miraculous feeling.
I mean, and if that's your life's calling and then, you're working in a time where there's in this specific area of nursing, there's this huge need. It makes sense that you
and that I could step into it. Sure,
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I?
Yeah. Thank you to our sponsor, Olivia Travel, the travel company for lesbian and LGBTQ+ women. Cruising is produced by a small but mighty team of 3 queer women, Rachel Karp, Jen McGinnity, and me, your host and editor, Sarah Gabrielli. Our theme song is by Joey Freeman. Thank you to Valery Hughes for inviting me into her home and sharing her story. Support us at buymeacoffee.com/cruisingpod. Find us on social media at cruisingpod and on the web at www.cruisingpod.com.
I'm Amy Nicholson, the film critic for the LA Times.
And I'm Paul Scheer, an actor, writer, and director. You might know me from The League, Veep, or my non-eligible for Academy Award role in Twisters.
We love movies, and we come at them from different perspectives.
Yeah, like Amy thinks that, Joe Pesci was miscast in Goodfellas, and I don't.
He's too old. Let's not forget that Paul thinks that Dune 2 is overrated.
It is.
Anyway, despite this, we come together to host Unspooled, a podcast where we talk about good movies, critical hits,
fan favorites, must-sees, and in case you missed them.
We're talking Parasite to Home Alone.
From Grease to The Dark Knight.
We've done deep dives on popcorn flicks. We've talked about why Independence Day deserves a second look.
And we've talked about horror movies, some that you've never even heard of, like Ganja and Hess.
So if you love movies like we do, come along on our cinematic adventure.
Listen to Unspooled wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to hit the follow button.
Hello, I am Kristen Russo.
And I am Jenny Owen Youngs.
We are the hosts of Buffering the Vampire Slayer once more with Spoilers, a rewatch podcast covering all 144 episodes of, you guessed it, Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
We are here to humbly invite you to join us for our 5th Buffy prom, which, if you can believe it, we are hosting at the actual Sunnydale High School. That's right. On April 4th and 5th, we will be descending upon the campus of Torrance High School, which was the filming location for Buffy's Sunnydale High, to dance the night away to 90s music in the iconic courtyard, to sip on punch right next to the Sunnydale High fountain, and to nerd out together in our prom best inside of the set of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
All information and tickets can be found at bufferingcast.com/prom. Come join us.